The cowboy hat was made popular in 1865 by the Stetson Hat Company and its founder, John B. Stetson. Part of its attractiveness in the American Old West was the wide brim that protected the cowboy from the elements, a high crown that kept a pocket of warm air on his head, and the ability to carry water if he needed to. All models of Stetson hats are made from blends of pre-treated fur, including beaver, rabbit, and wild hare. First, a worker gathers the mixture of different fur and deposits it into a picker machine that begins blending the fur together. The picker roller, which dates from the 1890s, sends the fur into a mixer. Inside the mixer, compressed air blows the fur around. This settles and removes any dust and dirt that may be trapped in the fur. After about an hour, the blended fur settles into a collection box. A worker puts it through a rotating loader machine that sends the fur into a multi-chambered blower. A look inside the blower reveals a series of picker rollers. These rollers, along with blowing air, allow the lighter fur to float through the chambers while the heavier hair and the impurities fall to the bottom. At the back of the blower, the worker gathers and weighs the amount of fur needed to make just one hat. That amount varies depending on the size and style. The proper amount of fur then moves by conveyor belt into a forming machine. Here, a vacuum sucks the fur onto a cone form. The fur builds up like a fragile blanket of dust that must be held down by a wet cotton mesh. For extra protection, a worker wraps burlap onto the cone and puts a metal cover over it. He weighs it down and gives the fur cone a good soaking in a vat of hot soapy water to make the fur fibers curl up and lock together. Shortly after, the worker peels the newly formed felted fur blanket off the cone. At this stage, the interlocked fur fibers are still very fragile, so a worker protects the cones from damage by wrapping them in cloth. Then she puts them through a hardening process, which consists of a series of massaging rollers and hot water baths. The rollers and the hot water baths increasingly shrink and tighten the fur fibers together. The final and most aggressive massage makes the fibers felt together even tighter, and the cone is now strong enough to manipulate by hand. But the cones must be even stronger than this, so she puts them through a final hardening stage that shrinks and tightens the fur fibers to the maximum. At last, the fragile cone that came out of the forming machine becomes the desired hat size. Tearing the felt by hand is now impossible. After the cones are dyed, they're placed on a crown machine. Here, he works the top of the cone and makes the felt more flexible. Another machine softens the brim. Together, the machines form the cone into more of a hat shape. After soaking the cone again, a worker puts it on a wet blocker machine. Its brass fingers secure and stretch out the felt, while it forces a crown shape into the hat body. Then he puts the hat body into a hat sucker or vacuum that sucks out most of the water. He then sets the hat bodies aside to dry for 24 hours. Up next, we'll see how these hat bodies are transformed into classic Stetson hats. Making a Stetson hat takes almost as much work now as it did in the early 1900s. Every hat made is still handled from start to finish by hand. Even some of the machines used are the same as in the past. The Stetson hat is an icon of the American cowboy lifestyle. A worker steams a hat body to make it supple. He puts it into a blocker machine with brass fingers that secure it in place. He steams it again, then inserts a wooden block and presses it into the crown. This gives the hat a specific head size. He puts another hat into the blocker, this time making another hat size. This is called blocking a hat. Blocking transforms the brim diameter and the crown from an almost shapeless cut of felt into a more solid body and precise hat size. A worker puts the blocked hat on a brim stiffener, which applies shellac. This shellac gives the brim extra firmness, making it easier to shape and style. He completes the brim stiffening operation and readies the correct number of hats to fill an order. A worker hangs up the hats for a natural air dry. 2 days later, a worker inserts blocks into the hat, which are color-coded for size. The blocks fit the hat on a pouncing machine that gently spins and sands the felt. This unsanded felt gets buffed until the hat ends up with the smoothest finish possible. Then a worker puts the hat onto a hydraulic crown press. Inside it, he places a piece of ink transfer paper and a heated aluminum mold. He lowers the press and applies the exact amount of pressure needed to mold a specific shape into the crown. On this particular hat, the press imprints the logo inside. Now the crown has a distinct shape. A worker then puts the hat on a brim cutter and holds it down flat with a cutting guide. She cuts the brim to the required dimension and removes the excess felt and the guide. A worker then puts the hat into a brim flanger, an aluminum mold that heats and shapes the brim. He then puts the hat onto an identical wooden shape and covers it to keep its form while cooling. Once cooled, this hat will keep its symmetrical curves that make it so distinctively Western. A worker then marks the center of the hat. She lines up a leather sweatband with the chalk mark and sews it in along the bottom edge of the crown. She then folds the sweatband in and makes sure the hat is perfect. She ties a classic ribbon band into a knot and secures it around the outside of the hat. She trims the ribbon to the appropriate size, which completes the work on the exterior of the hat. Then another worker puts it into a holder and peels up the sweatband. She places a lining inside the hat, applying drops of glue all the way around to keep it in place. She then puts the hat inside a box for shipping anywhere in the world. Authentic Stetson hats. Looking good, partner.